Okay.
Okay, hi there. This is Ed Wollman. I'm here with Annalee Kruger, and we're going to have a nice conversation today. This is a second part of a series on transition. And when is it time to have the tough conversation with your family members and all the different things you need to know about healthcare and transition and finances of long-term care. Today, we're going to be speaking about the financial aspects of it, as well as where to obtain healthcare. Obtaining healthcare is extremely complicated, whether you obtain it in your house, you go to assisted living, long-term care facility like a skilled facility. Annalee Kruger is a nationally recognized expert and national speaker on this subject of the aging plan, which she'll explain in more detail as we did last time in this presentation. At the end, we'll give you information on how to contact us, and you may ask any questions online by just sending us that information. Again, today we're talking about finances, where to obtain care, and then we're going to talk about, do you want to move up north or stay in your home state? In this case, I'm here in Florida. So, and we'll also talk about state-specific issues like homestead, which only applies in those certain states. Okay, fire away, Annalee.
Okay, well, great. Thank you, Ed, for having me back on this educational series. We're hoping that you're learning a lot of great information in small chunks, so it's easier to digest. And just know, if you're watching this or listening to this, that either Ed or I are available for phone calls and questions. If you have any, you can always reach out to us. So one of the things that my clients often think is, before they start working with me, is when I ask families, how do you suppose you would pay for care if mom and dad needed care? How would that be taken care of? And I don't know about you and your experience, but many times families just assume, or seniors just assume, that Medicare or Medicaid, they think they're the same thing. They think Medicare and Medicaid are kind of the same programs. And they think that Medicare or Medicaid will pay for everything that their loved one or that they need if they need care. So I thought it'd be important to talk about kind of different costs of care and how to pay for care in this beginning part of this section.
Excellent. I would like to jump in and just say that in my practice, the legal practice, again, Medicare versus Medicaid is super important. Medicare, you've paid into the system your whole life. And when you're a senior, Medicare pays for your healthcare costs, some of them. It does not pay for your residential cost. If you're poor, or if you run out of money, or if you're able to shelter your money appropriately according to the rules, then you can pass a test that says, I don't have enough money to pay for residential care. In that case, you would apply for the Medicaid benefit. So Medicaid is basically for people who have less assets. Medicare is for seniors, but it only covers the medical side of it. And then there's the private pay, the long-term care options, or self-pay.
Right. And so when we think about long-term care, maybe we should go into just some maybe different options in general, like what is home, home care is either paid for by private funds, or if they contract, if you have a VA benefit that you receive, some of these home care companies contract with the VA to help offset the cost. Some people use reverse mortgages. That's neither here nor there, but some people use reverse mortgages. Medicare will pay for some, as long as there's a doctor's order and the person has a skilled need, then Medicare will pay for that, but it's definitely not long-term. But the bulk of care is actually paid out of pocket.
Right. So Annalee, if you don't mind me stepping in, so I overstated that Medicare doesn't pay for it. So Medicare will pay for up to 100 days. For the first 20 days, they'll pay the whole thing. And then for the next 80 days, they'll pay a partial amount, which is up to it's basically 80%. But as soon as you reach a plateau and that you're not getting better, rehabilitation isn't for you, then they cut you off and you go to private pay. So it's kind of nasty to rely on Medicare. It's better when you're dealing with your financial planner and your estate planner that you plan to determine how are you going to obtain government benefits or pay yourself. Are you going to shelter your assets? If you're a married couple, you might want to shelter your assets at the first death. Or if it's later on in life and you're in crisis situation, with Annalee is usually dealing with, unfortunately, because planning ahead is much better. But if you're in crisis situation, then you have to come to somebody that's an elder law type attorney. Myself, I do estate planning, both elder law and advanced high-end planning, but we need to understand how you're going to be able to afford to pay for the high cost of care. At our last presentation, we talked about the myth that staying at home is less expensive. Around the clock care at $30 an hour is over $20,000 a month to stay at home, plus your housing costs. Going to a facility, assisted living is probably $6,000 plus around the country, and a skilled nursing facility is about twice that, somewhere $12,000 plus or minus, depending on the state. So back to you, Annalee Kruger, about what do you see most? Do you mostly see private pay in the crisis situation?
Yeah, because my clients are all, most of them are high net worth. So, but there's still an assumption sometimes that someone else is going to pay for mom's nursing home bill, right? So, but yeah, it's just really important to know, and that's why it's important to work with professionals who do this every day, and we know what the rules, we know what the regulations are, we know what the qualifications are, because what you were talking about, Ed, with Medicare paying up to 100 days, that's for a skilled rehab facility, and rarely does anyone ever use all 100 days. You have to be very sick, and I mean very, very medically complex, with like feeding tubes and skin sores and all those kind of things.
Annalee, there's also a very important thing to note, and I want everybody who's listening to write this down, but in order to qualify for the skilled rehabilitation Medicare 100 days, you have to first start, almost always, I'm not in the medical profession, but this is what I understand, with a 3 days admitted, not observed. The trick to the trade for them to keep you out is to keep you there on observation only. You need to be admitted and stay for 3 nights before you go to a skilled facility. And that's one of the tricks of the trade to get into these skilled facilities, is to have that 3-day stay at the hospital first. So if you do fall down and go boom, as I say, and you end up in the hospital, don't run to bring your spouse home. I'm not trying to be cold and insensitive, but don't run to bring your spouse home if that's not what's in your spouse's best interest. You may very likely need to keep your spouse at the hospital for those 3 admitted days so they can get into the skilled facility under the Medicare benefit.
So I'm going to give a personal experience here, right? Because Medicare, when we talk about days, it's midnights. Medicare, your head, what we say in the industry is your head has to be in the bed at midnight, because that's what Medicare guidelines are. It's midnight. So for example, several years ago, my mom was, because I know healthcare, she looked like she was having a urinary tract infection, you know, and so she was really lethargic and she was falling and all of this kind of stuff. And those are, if you know aging, those are classic symptoms of a urinary tract infection. So we got her to the ER. We got her there at like 5 o'clock in the afternoon, right? But by the time they got to her and all that kind of stuff, it was 11 o'clock at night, and they're running tests, and it's clear that she has a urinary tract infection, but she was very, very weak. And so why I bring this up, why it matters what time, is because we finally got all these tests back and finally got to talk to the doctor at 11 o'clock at night. And I'm like, so we have 1 hour. So what are you going to do? Are you going to send her home, or are you going to keep her? Because if you're going to keep her, we want night 1. We want in 1 hour, within 1 hour for her to be actually admitted. You have to make sure that they check the admission box, not the observation box. And we'll talk about why that's important. So we did get her admitted, because when you're an informed consumer, that saves you money and angst, right? So
Yes.
if you know the Medicare rule is midnight, you have to push and advocate that you get your loved one admitted by midnight, because we didn't know if there were going to be other ramifications from this urinary tract infection. And the reason why it matters is because if my mom was so weak from this urinary tract infection, and sometimes sometimes, when they're doing these tests, they find other things that are wrong. And you're like, oh my gosh, thank goodness for the urinary tract infection. Otherwise, we would have known that she had kidney stones or something else came up. And so why it's important is because if she would have needed to stay in the hospital for basically 2 more nights to capture her 3rd Medicare night or 3rd midnight, then if the doctor said, well, Annalee, your mom isn't strong enough to go back home, we recommend that she go into a rehab center, then that's what triggers a qualifying stay with Medicare Part A to say, yep, she met her 3 overnight stays, her 3 midnights in the hospital. Now Medicare Part A will pay they'll pay 100% up to day 20. And then, and very, like I said, very, very few people maximize their 100 days because you have to be incredibly sick. Like, that's not what you want to do, because that means you're very, very sick. And so if they would have missed the midnight deadline and then later said, yeah, she needs to go into a rehab unit, we would have had to pay, or mom and dad would have had to pay private pay for her to go into rehab, and that's hundreds of dollars a day. So if there's one takeaway from this section, is know what the rules are, and make sure that you understand if it's you that's in the hospital or your loved one, make sure that you know their status. Are they on observation or are they admitted? Because that's thousands of dollars of difference for out-of-pocket expense.
Thank you, Annalee. Let's switch over to the finances now. So if you're going to privately finance, you want to build a sinking fund, money that's available to take care of long-term care. And what your financial advisor will teach you is that it takes quite a large sinking fund to cover this expense. The average stay in a facility is 3 years. So therefore, you would need about 3 years in this sinking fund. What one of my friends in the industry said is that the average stay is 3 years, but none of my clients are average. Therefore, you have to plan for the long haul. On that note, if you do decide to pay privately, you can have money set aside. You can buy a traditional long-term care policy. You pay annually, or you can buy one of these newfangled long-term care policies. You can give them a lump sum up front and get a tremendous amount of money back in the form of a death benefit if you don't use it. That product can be part of your annuities, or it can be part of life insurance products, which they're all, annuities are as well. But you want to talk to your financial advisor regarding traditional long-term care, pay as you go, annually, lump sum, linked benefits, getting money back at the end of your life, annuities, which have a rider to them that provide a long-term care benefit, or life insurance that has an accelerated benefit. Let me tell you about the last one because it's my favorite, although might not be the most affordable. If you buy life insurance, you know you're going to get your money back because it's going to come in the form of a death benefit. But if you don't die, you don't get the benefit. So what they did is they created an accelerated benefit. If you can't do 2 of your 6 activities of daily living, it accelerates the death benefit while you're living. And you buy the amount you want, 1%, 2%, up to 5% of the death benefit paid out monthly. So if you have a $500,000 policy, and you have a 2% benefit, that's $10,000 a month, which will go a long way to providing the care. So that's a life insurance contract with an accelerated benefit. Please ask us about that or contact your financial advisor to go into details. Some financial advisors think it's a waste of money. You might as well self-insure. Other financial advisors are gung-ho on making sure you've got a long-term care product. So I think that's enough on the finances for today. Let's jump into the more critical. Finish your thought, Annalee, and then we'll jump into where do you get your health care from?
You do know me well, because you know that I was getting ready to say something. One thing that I would add is that when you're talking about insurance, you need to be looking into the stuff now, because you have to pass underwriting for stuff. Like, I have one of those life insurance hybrids. You have to pass underwriting and stuff. So with other insurances as well, the time is now to really look at what is that financial picture? How would I pay for care? Because there's some conditions that you get, if you get diabetes or if you end up with cancer or things like that, you may not qualify for certain types of insurance. So it's important to just, talk with your team, your financial team of professionals, and really explore what are my options, what makes sense for me if I want to have this and this and this taken care of as I age, and knowing that the cost of care is only going to go up. So
Perfect.
all right.
So let me say, by a show of hands, even though we can't see your hands, everybody raise your hand if you want to go live with your son or your daughter up north in their home, either in the attic or the basement. Just kidding about that. But in the old days, when we all grew up, grandma lived upstairs. But, most people don't want to put the burden on their children. So they want to plan ahead. And Annalee, unfortunately, usually doesn't get hired until you're in crisis. Our goal is for you to consider creating an aging plan now versus when you're in crisis. So Annalee, just give a brief reminder of what your aging plan is, and then the options regarding staying at home, combine it with the going up north, the problems with getting good quality home care, home health care, and who manages that home health agency's work when people don't show up.
So we'll talk about the aging plan. So you're right. Unfortunately, most times families don't think about putting an aging plan in place until they're in crisis mode and they're kind of forced into it. So when I talk about crisis mode, I'm talking like mom's the primary caregiver to dad. Dad has dementia. Mom falls. She breaks her hip. She's in the hospital now for hospital and rehab for 4 or 5 weeks. And the kids are like, oh my gosh, what are we supposed to do with dad? We didn't realize he was so demented. What do we do? So when I say crisis, it's a variation of the same thing. Or the adult kids are burned out as caregivers because they've moved mom and dad in, or they're flying back and forth every couple weeks or a month to check on mom and dad. So when we talk about an aging plan, we know that most families don't talk about the what ifs of aging until they're kind of forced into it, which is usually the crisis. So I facilitate family meetings and we talk about what's working well, what's not working well, what are the goals, what are the resources. Goals are usually to stay at home. That's great, but do you have the financial backing to be able to afford to do that? And what's the plan if aging at home is no longer safe, feasible, or affordable? Where does it make sense for you or your parents to live? Does it make sense to stay, in this case down here in Florida, if none of your kids live here? Or does it make sense to relocate when the time comes that you need more and more care? Does it make sense to move closer to where your kids are, where they can advocate for you and meet you at the hospital when you get sick and those kind of things? So we talk about where does it make sense to get care? We know that most people want to age in place at home, but we also know that assisted livings and nursing centers are full of people who also wanted to stay at home. So like our team, when we talk about, we want to, have mom and dad move closer to us in Madison, Wisconsin. Great. Okay. So my team and I do all of the market research on all of those different home care options and care facility options, looking at state surveys and staffing models and all that kind of stuff. So we do the legwork for families because they don't usually know what the differences are in levels of care and what questions to ask and what to look for. So we teach. My model is more of an education teaching model so that these families can make informed decisions. And that's the watered down version of what an aging plan is, but it's really needing that neutral third party family meeting facilitator to help guide them through these types of decisions and questions.
Annalee, let me make a note that children can be the caregivers and can get paid, sometimes under the long-term care contract, otherwise out of the parents' assets. The children also could be a resource to loan the parents money against their house. We have designed in my law firm an intra-family reverse mortgage where you don't have to bother going to a bank, but instead you borrow the money from one of your more comfortable children financially, and they're capable, they want to do it, but they then get a lien against your house. So when you do have to finally move out of your house or you pass away, when the house gets sold before the assets get split among all of your heirs, that person gets paid back with interest. So that intra-family reverse mortgage is a combination of where am I going to live and how am I going to finance it. It's one of my techniques I use to save the day at the end. Tell me more about the problems with home health care, because that's what most people start with. I think they usually start with about 2 to 4 hours a day, 2 to 4 days a week, and build up. And what I tell you all from a financial point of view, that until you get to about 8 hours a day, 7 days a week, you don't hit that crossover point. At that point, you're spending around $6,000 a month. So 7 days a week, 8 hours a day, which is one of the 3 shifts, because you got 3 shifts in 24 hours. If you're only at 1 shift, it's about $6,000. It's break even whether you should go to assisted living if you have to go. But after that, you really have to start determining whether you can afford to stay at home or should you go to assisted living. Annalee, what are your thoughts?
Oh, I have a lot of thoughts on that. Okay, so I'm just we'll do the quick thoughts. So my clients who have chosen to age in place at home, these are their complaints. First of all, in healthcare, we have a major staffing shortage. We've always had a staffing shortage, but like now it's even worse with the pandemic. So most home care companies require a 4 or 5 hour shift minimum. So you're already going to be committed to, if it's $30 an hour and it's 5 hour minimum, you're already committed to $150 for that 5 hour period of time, right? So my clients that have chosen to stay at home, these are their complaints. It gets expensive quickly because yes, you might only need 2 or 3 days a week, but when you're nearing more and more care because you're getting more sick and losing mobility, it gets very expensive. Other complaints are that because they're having because of consistency of caregivers. So most companions want to have an 8, 10, or 12 hour shift. Many of them don't like to have these short shifts because they make more money the longer the shift, because they'd rather have a couple of clients versus 10 or 15 clients, right? So they prefer the longer shifts, especially like in Naples. I have clients paying $40 and $50 an hour for home care because companions only make $11 or $13 an hour. So they don't live in Naples. They can't afford to. So to serve you in Naples, they have to drive an hour just to get there. So they don't want a 4 hour shift. So the complaints are the cost, because you have to pay premium if your caregiver has to drive a long ways to serve you. Consistency of staff. Say you have a 12 hour shift and the caregiver doesn't show up. How are you going to get toileted? How are you going to get to your doctor's appointment? How are you going to accomplish what was on your schedule for the day? And that's when we see people falling because there's no one there that they can send to cover the shift. Or by the same token, to cover that 12 hour shift, they might have to send 3 or 4 different people for 3 or 4 hours at a time to cover that shift if they actually have enough people on the bench to send. Other complaints are that my clients feel like they have to consistently train the staff because they have so much inconsistent caregivers that they're constantly getting someone new in there, and that makes them uncomfortable because they don't know these people and they're dependent and reliant on them. Other complaints are that they don't always have the best common sense. Common sense or critical thinking skills. Probably literally 5 or 6 times a month, I get calls from clients because the toilet ran over and the companion doesn't know how to shut off the water. So just critical thinking skills, some common sense. So and then there's the English barrier or language barrier down here. So I have a lot of clients down here in Florida that their companion is literally working their shift using an English translation app. So when we talk about, which is fine, so when we talk about if your goal is to age in place at home, you really need to set expectations accordingly, right? But by the same token, when you get the right companions, I have a lot of clients across the country that they found the rock star gold nugget companion, and it is a wonderful, wonderful thing. So those are some considerations about aging in place at home. Conversations lead to when does it make sense to make that move?
And one other thing, if it is a single parent or a single individual that has this home care, often they'll reject them. They'll show up at the door and they'll send them away because they don't understand even who they are, why they're there, because they're having memory issues. It's what I like a lot about planning ahead is you can visit these beautiful brand new assisted living facilities. You can visit these residential places that have been around forever, that are wonderful, that have a lot of built-in amenities. And you can visit them when you're young and healthy, whatever young and healthy is. You could be a young and healthy 85-year-old. It's just a matter of you deciding, you controlling that, hey, if this happens, I would really like to go to XYZ because I think they have a good program. And people like Annalee that are in the business of placement as well as management, as well as helping set up an aging plan, they know what's going on in these facilities, that it's cliquey or they have too much turnover. In the last 10 years, they've had 5 executive directors. The food's lousy. So it's really important that you take control and you plan early and then monitor that plan.
I think that what's also important to note is, like I said, 92% of my clients come to me in crisis. We have to do all of this stuff very, very quickly. And in 30 years of working with families, I've never had a family come back to me and say, gosh, Annalee, I feel really confident about the decisions that we had to make in the midst of a crisis. So our whole hope is to reach families ahead of time, because you have much better outcomes when there's a medical crisis. Your loved one ends up in whichever facility has an open bed that they can accept, that they get accepted into. And so we teach families how to do the tours. We have a 7-page checklist, for example, of how to tour, what questions to ask, what to look for. We have a 7-page checklist on how to be a bold advocate, whether your loved one's in the ER, getting home care, or in a facility. So it's important to be an informed consumer and a proactive planner so that you're not thrust into making big decisions quickly. No one feels good about that.
Just so we stay on time and I provide the answer for the state issues. Here in Florida, we have a unusual law that some other states have, but not too many, called homestead. And if you need to go to a nursing home and spend down all your money, you're allowed to keep your house and pass your house to your children without having to sell it. And it's exempt from paying the creditors when you pass away. So it's very important not to sell your primary residence if you have not already spoken to your attorney and your financial advisor regarding capital gains consequences, as well as the state specific laws such as homestead in Florida. So on that note, I think I'd like to wrap up on the following comment or the following topic. Could you compare assisted living to skilled care, an ALF to what's called a SNF, a skilled nursing facility, AKA SNF, or an ALF, and just show them, when do you have to go in the ALF door versus when do you go in the skilled door and level 1, 2, 3, 4 of care?
So you have to, what many families don't realize is, to move into most of these care communities, you have to financially qualify, you have to cognitively qualify, and physically qualify. When people choose to age in place at home, what happens is they end up waiting too long at home to be able to then move into assisted living, because now they don't meet assisted living criteria of being able to do certain things for themselves, or they're too high of a fall risk, or they're too confused or too demented to qualify for assisted living. So you want to be thinking about these things ahead of time, because assisted living is a totally different environment from a living perspective, and a total different price point than a nursing home. A nursing home is going to, it's 24/7 care. There's an RN, a registered nurse, on all 3 shifts. There's 24/7 caregivers. They're caregivers that will take care of you, going to the bathroom and transferring and feeding you if you need help. But it's 24/7, and it's twice the cost of assisted living, and it's a very different environment. You may have a roommate in the nursing home. You may have to share a bathroom with 3 other residents in a nursing home. So it's important to know what the differences in levels of care are.
So from a layperson's point of view, from my point of view as an attorney, when you walk into a nursing home, a skilled nursing facility, it's the old traditional nursing home. When you walk into assisted living, sometimes it looks like a country club or a Marriott hotel. So there's all different levels of assisted living, and you pay for the different levels. Level 1 is you can do a lot yourself. Level 4 is they almost do everything for you, but it's still not 24/7. You're still by yourself, and they come in and assist you maybe once every several hours or when you call them. So it's not enough for a lot of people. They really do need that skilled care, but the skilled care looks, walks, and talks more like the old-fashioned nursing home. Even though some of them are beautiful, they still have that element of feeling like you're in almost in a hospital room. So we want you to get into the assisted living earlier when you can qualify, and then you may be able to stay there for the rest of your life, even if you get worse. On that note, Annalee, thank you very much. I look forward to our next series, where we'll get into the team approach. We'll get into the difficult conversation about these subjects, but have the difficult conversation not only with yourself. Today was more about having the conversation with yourself. Now we're going to have to start opening the door to having these conversations with your family members. When do you bring your family members in? Who do you bring to your long-term care team? There's many people on that team, far beyond what you would think, and we'll talk about that next time.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.